The alarm clock rang at 6:12 a.m. Elisa rolled over slowly, still half asleep, unaware that this would be the final morning of the life she knew. She brewed her usual coffee, spread butter on toast, sorted through the bills for the bank, and opened the window to let the sunlight in. On the TV, a news anchor talked about traffic, while birds sang outside her window. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, even beautiful in a quiet way. She sent a quick message to her sister. "Heading to the bank today. I'll call you later." Then she texted her husband, already on the road to work. "Drive safe. I love you." There were no signs, no warning, nothing in the air to suggest that her world was about to collapse. Because sometimes, the sky is clearest right before it falls. It was 8:43 a.m. when the phone rang. Elisa was just about to step out, keys in hand, purse on her shoulder. She glanced at the screen. It was the hospital. Her brow furrowed. "Must be a wrong number," she whispered to herself. She answered calmly, but within seconds, her world turned upside down. "Mrs. Elisa, your husband's been in an accident. We need you to come right away." The key slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a sharp, echoing sound. Her chest tightened. The room felt smaller. Time slowed. Her lips parted to speak, but nothing came out. "Ma'am, are you still there? Can you come now? It's urgent." She didn't reply. She simply ran, left the door wide open, phone still in hand, heart pounding so loud she could barely think. The sunlight outside felt cruel now, each step heavier than the last. The world hadn't ended, but it was already beginning to crumble. Elisa burst through the hospital doors, breathless, eyes wide, hands trembling. The air inside was cold, sterile. It smelled like antiseptic and quiet desperation. A nurse at the front desk looked up. Elisa could barely form the words. "My husband, you called, he was in an accident." The nurse's expression shifted. She stood quickly and motioned toward a hallway. "Come with me." They walked past rows of rooms and wheelchairs and closed curtains. Each step sounded louder than the last. Finally, they stopped. The nurse didn't open the door. She just turned to her with lowered eyes and said, "The doctor will be right with you." Elisa's legs felt like stone. She stared at the door. Behind it, answers. Behind it, maybe the end. The doctor came out slowly. His face was calm, but it wasn't good news. Calm. "Mrs. Elisa, your husband was in a collision, a drunk driver. He was unconscious when brought in." She felt her knees weaken. The doctor continued, "We're doing everything we can, but it's critical." No words made sense. No sounds reached her fully. The hallway spun. Her heartbeat became the only thing she could hear. And in that moment, her world fell completely, painfully, silent. Elisa sat alone in the cold waiting room. Time didn't move like it used to. Every second dragged like an anchor across her chest. She clenched her hands, then opened them. Clenched. Opened. Over and over. The TV in the corner played some daytime talk show. Laughter and applause. But it sounded a million miles away. None of it mattered. The world could be celebrating outside, and she wouldn't notice. Nurses passed by. Doctors whispered. No one looked her in the eye. Every time the door opened, her breath caught in her throat. But no one came for her. She remembered their last conversation that morning. His smile, his voice, the way he always kissed her forehead before leaving. "I love you." She hadn't even said it back. Why hadn't she said it back? She buried her face in her hands and whispered, "Please, God, not him. Anyone but him." But the silence answered her. And when the doctor finally returned, his face told her everything, before he even said a word. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." The words barely registered. They floated in the air, cold and weightless, yet heavy enough to crush her. Elisa stared at the doctor. Her lips moved, but nothing came out. No scream, no sob, no breath. He was gone. Her husband, her partner, her anchor, her best friend was just gone. A sound escaped her throat, somewhere between a gasp and a groan, as if her soul itself had cracked. She stumbled backward, then collapsed into the chair. People tried to speak to her. A nurse offered water. Someone touched her shoulder, but all she heard was the sound of her heartbeat, and then his voice echoing from memory. "I love you. Drive safe." She whispered back into the void. I didn't even say it back. And just like that, the grief didn't feel soft or sad. It burned. It clawed. It screamed from within. A question rose up like a flame in her chest. Who did this to him? Because grief wasn't the only thing born in that hospital. Something else was waking up inside her. Something darker. Something louder. Hours passed, but Elisa couldn't leave. She sat in the same chair staring at the wall. The world outside the hospital kept moving. Cars, clouds, clocks. But her world had stopped. Right there, in that sterile corridor, a police officer approached quietly. "Mrs. Elisa, I'm sorry for your loss. I know this is difficult, but we need to ask a few questions." She nodded, numb. The officer sat beside her and opened a small notebook. The driver responsible was under the influence. We have his name. Elisa didn't react. She barely blinked. It was Marcos Azevedo. The name hit her like ice water. She turned sharply toward the officer, her voice suddenly sharp and alive. "What did you say?" "Marcos Azevedo. Do you know him?" She did, all too well. He wasn't just anyone. He was her sister's husband, family, and in an instant, the grief turned into something even worse. Betrayal. Her world hadn't just shattered, it had been shattered. By someone she trusted. Elisa stood in the hallway, frozen. The name echoed in her head like a curse. Marcos Azevedo, the man who had just destroyed her life, had sat at her dinner table countless times, had toasted with them on New Year's Eve, had laughed with her husband, had hugged her, had called her family. She remembered his smile, his jokes, the way he'd say, "We're all we've got. Blood is everything." Now, that blood felt like poison in her veins. "Did he survive?" she asked the officer, her voice cold and trembling. "Yes. He was injured but stable. He's in custody now." Her knees almost buckled. He had lived. Her husband was dead, and the man who killed him lived. She wanted to scream, to break something, to rip the air apart. But instead, she just whispered, "Tell my sister I never want to see her again." Because in that moment, Elisa didn't just lose her husband. She lost her family, her trust, her faith in people. And somewhere deep inside her heart, a seed of hatred began to grow, dark and steady. Elisa didn't attend the funeral. She couldn't. The thought of standing beside her sister, pretending to be part of a family, pretending to accept condolences from people who didn't know the full story, it made her sick. So she stayed home, alone. She sat on the floor of their bedroom for hours, holding his shirt like it was oxygen. The scent of him still clung to the fabric. She pressed it to her face, hoping the memory would last longer than the pain. But it didn't. People called. She didn't answer. They knocked. She didn't open. The world tried to reach her, but she let it know. "I don't want saving. I want silence." And slowly, the silence obeyed. The curtains stayed closed. The mirrors were covered. The photos turned face down. Each day she built a new wall inside herself, a wall made of bitterness, of sleepless nights, of the single thought that haunted her. He's gone because someone I loved chose to be reckless. Forgiveness? That word was dead to her now. Anger became her shelter. Grief became her identity. And she wore both like armor. Weeks passed, then months. But inside Elisa, time stood still. People stopped calling, stopped visiting. Even her sister, after a few desperate messages, finally gave up. And that was exactly what Elisa wanted. Silence, distance, space to feel her rage without anyone trying to take it away. She refused therapy. She refused church. She refused the soft voices that said, "You need to let go. Forgiveness will set you free." She didn't want to be free. She wanted to remember, to never forget what was stolen from her. Some nights she would scream into her pillow. Other nights she'd stare at the ceiling, whispering one word again and again. Why? Why him? Why her? Why Marcos? Why did he live? But she got no answers. No peace, only a deeper certainty. Forgiveness is for cowards. I'm not letting anyone off the hook, especially not him. And with every passing day, her heart didn't just break, it calcified, hard, cold, and utterly unreachable. It was a Sunday morning, cloudy, quiet. Elisa hadn't left the house in weeks. She lived between the bedroom and the kitchen, drifting like a shadow. But that day, there was a knock at the door. She ignored it, at first. Then it came again, firm, patient. She opened the door just enough to see who it was. An old woman stood there, small frame, wrinkled hands, eyes full of something familiar. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said softly, "but I live 3 houses down. I've seen you a few times. You used to smile. Now, you don't." Elisa didn't respond. She gripped the edge of the door, ready to shut it, but the woman continued. "We're having a small gathering tonight at the church on the corner. Nothing fancy, just people trying to breathe again. You should come." Elisa gave a dry laugh. "You think a prayer circle is going to fix this?" The woman didn't flinch. "No, but it might stop you from drowning in it." Then she turned and walked away. Elisa closed the door slowly, but the silence wasn't the same anymore. Her armor was still up, but something had cracked. That night, Elisa sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the clock. 6:48 p.m. The gathering was at 7. She wasn't dressed, she hadn't showered, she hadn't even decided if she cared. But her mind wouldn't stop. What if it's pointless? What if she's right? What if something shifts? What if nothing does? She looked at the picture frame on her nightstand. The one with his smile, the one she still couldn't bring herself to move. Then, almost without thinking, she stood, put on jeans, a plain sweater, pulled her hair back. She looked in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. But it didn't matter. She walked out the door, keys in hand, and whispered under her breath, "I'm not going for them. I'm going for him. Because if there's a chance his soul can hear me, I need him to know I'm not okay." And with that, Elisa stepped out into the night for the first time in months, not to be healed, not to forgive, just to survive the noise inside her. The church was small, old, the kind with wooden pews and cracked stained glass that painted faded colors on the floor. Elisa walked in just as the music began, soft, unpolished, raw. There were maybe a dozen people there. No bright lights, no stage, no microphones, just a circle of chairs, a guitar, and voices that didn't try to impress. She stood in the back, arms crossed, ready to walk out at the first cliché. But then a man spoke. Not a pastor, just someone broken. "I didn't come here because I'm holy. I came because I hate what's in my heart. I came because anger made me sick, and bitterness made me blind. I didn't come to be fixed. I came to not fall apart." Elisa felt something in her throat tighten. She looked down, pretending not to listen. But her heart listened. They weren't preaching. They were bleeding. And in that room, surrounded by strangers who had lost things too, she didn't feel quite so alone. One woman across the circle made eye contact with her. No smile, no pity, just a nod, like saying, "Me too." And for the first time in a long time, Elisa didn't feel the need to run. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but she stayed. And in the stillness, God didn't shout, he whispered. They were reading from the Gospel of Matthew. The words weren't new to Elisa. She'd heard them in childhood, long before the world had teeth, but this time, they landed differently. The woman leading the group said softly, "Forgiveness isn't approval. It's not forgetting. It's just the key that lets you walk out of a prison you didn't know you built for yourself." Elisa felt her jaw tighten. Forgiveness, she thought, is how people excuse monsters like Marcos. But the voice inside her pushed back. Or maybe forgiveness is the only thing stronger than what he did to you. She shifted in her seat, arms crossed tighter. No one was looking at her, but the words kept pulling. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die, the woman continued, but it's your soul that stops breathing. Elisa blinked hard. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to feel, but something cracked again, deeper this time. Not because she was ready, not because she wanted to forgive, but because something inside her whispered, you can't carry this much longer and still survive. That night, Elisa didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words from the gathering playing on a loop in her mind. They weren't loud, they weren't pushy, they were just there, settling into the cracks of her soul. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. You built a prison to survive. It's your soul that stops breathing. She tossed and turned, tried to drown it all out with music, with distraction, with silence. Nothing worked. At 2:47 a.m., she got up. She stood in front of the mirror and looked herself in the eye. What she saw wasn't strength. It was exhaustion, not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that rots from the inside. She spoke aloud to the empty room. I don't know how to forgive. I don't want to, but I can't live like this either. Her voice cracked. And then came the first tear she had allowed herself in weeks. Not the scream, not the rage, just a tear. And behind it, a whisper from somewhere deep inside. Maybe letting go isn't weakness. Maybe it's survival. She collapsed to the floor, not with anger this time, but with surrender. No lightning, no thunder, just a woman, finally allowing herself to feel. Morning came slowly. Elisa sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of cold coffee she hadn't touched. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from the weight of everything pressing inward. She opened her journal, pages blank since the funeral, and on the first empty line, she wrote 3 words. I'm still angry. Then she added, I don't know how to forgive. I don't know if I want to, but I don't want to stay broken either. She stared at the page. The honesty of it stung more than she expected. This wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't peace, but it was truth. And that was something. She closed the journal and whispered, God, if you're real, if you're still here, show me how, because I can't do this alone. No voice answered, but for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel cruel. It felt like space, room to breathe. Forgiveness wasn't a mountain to conquer today, it was just a door. And Elisa had placed her hand on the handle. That night, after weeks of restless sleep, Elisa finally drifted off. And that's when she saw him. He stood in a quiet field, sunlight dripping through the trees. He looked exactly as she remembered, shirt half tucked, soft smile, eyes full of that steady warmth she used to lean on. She didn't run to him, she didn't speak. She just stared, heart thundering in her chest. He walked toward her slowly, and when he got close enough, he gently took her hand and whispered, You don't have to carry this anymore. Her lips trembled, but if I let go, it's like saying what happened is okay. He shook his head softly. Forgiving him doesn't mean you forget me. It means you remember me without drowning. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know how. He smiled, calm, kind, unshaken. Start where you are, with what you feel. Let the pain rise, and then release it to the one who never stopped holding you. And then he pulled her into a hug. It was warm, real, familiar in a way that shattered every wall she had rebuilt. When she woke, her face was soaked with tears. And for the first time, they didn't taste like anger. They tasted like surrender. The next morning, Elisa stood by the window staring at the street below. People walked, cars passed, life moved on. She held the journal in her hands, open to the page where she had written, I'm still angry. But today, she added something new beneath it. I want to forgive, but I don't feel it yet. Still, I choose it, even if my heart doesn't catch up today. She closed the book and whispered, God, this isn't clean, this isn't pretty, but it's real. So here it is. Then she did something she hadn't done since the accident. She reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. She typed a message to her sister. I'm not ready to talk, but I'm asking God to help me forgive. Not because he deserves it, but because I can't live with this poison anymore. She stared at the words, every part of her wanting to delete them. But she didn't. She hit send, then placed the phone face down and walked away. It didn't feel like release. It didn't feel like a miracle. But for the first time, she was moving. Not fast, not far, but forward. And sometimes, that's all heaven needs to begin something holy. Elisa sat on the edge of her bed, hands clenched, breath shallow. The room was still. Outside, the sky was turning gold with the setting sun. She looked at the framed photo on the dresser. Him, mid-laugh, eyes crinkled, joy frozen in time. Then she whispered into the silence, Marcos, you broke everything. You stole someone who was my whole world. You tore my family apart. And I've hated you every day since. She paused, her voice trembling. But I can't keep carrying this weight. It's killing me. And he wouldn't want that. A long breath. A shake of the head. Then she closed her eyes and said the words that had once felt impossible. I forgive you. They didn't feel powerful. They didn't feel clean. They felt messy, uncertain. But once they were spoken, something shifted. She didn't break down. She didn't fall apart. But a wall inside her collapsed quietly. And behind it, for the first time in what felt like forever, there was space for peace to enter. Not a flood, just a breeze. But she felt it. And it was enough. The next morning felt different. Elisa didn't wake up with the usual weight on her chest. It wasn't that everything was healed. It was just lighter. She opened the window, let the breeze in, watched the world move, and, for the first time in a long while, didn't resent it for doing so. She made coffee, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And when she walked past the photo of him, his smile forever frozen in time, she didn't look away. She looked right at it and smiled back. Not because she no longer missed him. She did, but because now the memory didn't only hurt, it warmed her. Forgiveness hadn't erased the pain. It had transformed it. She wasn't drowning anymore. She was rising. Something had been returned to her, a part of herself that grief had buried. And for the first time, she whispered into the quiet, I'm going to be okay. Not because she had all the answers, but because she no longer needed them to begin again. Elisa stood at her closet, staring at a dress she hadn't worn in over a year. It was nothing special, just soft fabric and faded color, but it reminded her of who she used to be. Before the silence, before the anger, before the day everything fell apart. She put it on. It felt strange, like stepping into someone else's life. But when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the same woman anymore. She saw someone older, softer, stronger. Later that day, she walked to the corner cafe, the one she used to visit with him. Every step felt symbolic. Every face, every noise, every smell, a reminder that the world had gone on without her. And now, she was choosing to rejoin it. The girl behind the counter smiled. Hey, I haven't seen you in forever. Elisa smiled back, gently, quietly. I've been away. No explanation. No story, just truth. She ordered coffee, sat by the window, and for the first time in what felt like another lifetime, she watched the world not from behind a wall of pain, but with eyes that were healing. There was still a scar, But now, it no longer defined her. The days that followed weren't magical. There were still quiet moments of ache, still nights where memories flickered like old film, but something had changed. Something steady. Something sacred. Elisa started waking up earlier. She took walks, stopped avoiding people, stopped avoiding herself. She even said yes to a neighbor's invitation for lunch. Small talk, laughter. It felt strange, but real. And one afternoon, as she watered the plants on her balcony, she noticed something. They were blooming again. She hadn't realized how long she'd neglected them, how lifeless they'd become. Like her. She touched one of the flowers gently and whispered, "We're both coming back, aren't we?" It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. It was just truth. A quiet, living truth. Grief hadn't left, but it no longer ruled. Hate hadn't vanished, but it no longer dictated her steps. She was becoming someone new, not in spite of the pain, but because she had walked through it. And with every breath, with every step, Elisa was choosing life. Again. It was a rainy Tuesday when Elisa saw her, an older woman on the sidewalk holding 2 grocery bags and an umbrella that kept folding in on itself with the wind. Cars passed. People walked by. No one stopped, but Elisa did. She walked over, gently took one of the bags and said, "Let me help you." The woman blinked in surprise. "Are you sure, dear? It's pouring." Elisa smiled softly. "I've walked through worse." They walked together in silence until the woman's apartment building came into view. At the door, she turned and placed a hand on Elisa's arm. "Thank you. People don't stop much these days." Elisa shook her head. "I didn't used to either." The woman smiled with that kind of wisdom that doesn't need words. "Then maybe that's how we start healing the world again. One interruption at a time." Elisa nodded. She hadn't expected the moment to matter, but it did. It wasn't just a good deed. It was a mirror, showing her that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone who gave life, too. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt proud of who she was becoming. A few weeks later, Elisa received a message. It was from the woman who had led the circle at the church. "We're holding a new gathering next Sunday. A few of us are sharing how we got through what tried to break us. Would you consider speaking?" Elisa stared at the screen. Her heart raced. Speak. She wasn't a speaker. She was barely still learning how to breathe without breaking. Her first instinct was to say no, to hide, to protect what little peace she had finally gathered. But then something inside her stirred. A quiet voice, no longer buried by anger. "Your healing wasn't just for you." She didn't sleep much that night. She thought about her journey, the accident, the rage, the dream, the forgiveness, how nothing happened quickly, and how maybe someone else out there was in chapter 1 of their own pain, and maybe they needed to know there was a chapter 23. She opened her phone and typed, "I'll be there." Not because she felt ready, but because she knew. Sometimes, the deepest healing happens when we give away the very grace that saved us. The room was quiet. Not with awkwardness, but with the kind of silence that listens with its whole heart. Elisa stood at the front. No podium, no script, just a circle of folding chairs and faces waiting. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone. She took a breath, then another, and began. "I lost my husband in one day, to someone I trusted, to someone who should have protected us, not destroyed us." A pause. For months, I didn't sleep. I didn't pray. I didn't believe healing was real, because I thought forgiveness meant pretending it didn't hurt. The room leaned in, silently. But then, I realized unforgiveness was keeping me in a grave I wasn't meant to stay in. And when I whispered, "I forgive you," I didn't feel powerful. I felt terrified. But slowly, my soul began to breathe again. She looked around, eyes glistening. Forgiveness didn't erase my pain. It transformed it into purpose. Someone sniffled quietly in the back. Another nodded slowly, eyes closed. Elisa smiled, not because she was done healing, but because she was no longer afraid of the process. So if you're holding on to something that's killing you quietly, just know you don't have to wait to feel ready. Sometimes you just have to open the door and let grace walk in. Silence, then applause. But more than that, freedom for everyone in that room. Elisa walked home beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. Each step felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because she no longer carried it alone. That night, she sat on her balcony, the same spot where months ago she had stared into nothing, where bitterness had once made its home. Now, there was peace. She looked up at the stars and whispered into the quiet, "I lost everything in one day, but I found something greater when I chose to forgive." She didn't just mean her husband or her old life. She meant the version of herself she thought had died with him. The strong one, the soft one, the one who could smile without guilt, the one who could love again without fear. Forgiveness didn't change the past, but it changed her future. And as she sat there, a gentle breeze passing over her skin, she knew she had walked through fire and somehow come out whole, not untouched, but reborn. Because grace doesn't erase the pain, it transforms the ashes into something worth living for. And this was her beginning.